Both of you have taken to a life in the creative world now. You've been writing, Vikrant. Some of your translations have won awards, and Neelesh, you seem to have lead a life of many parts, apart from being a voiceover artist and a theatre person. Would you want to tell briefly what made you do this rather unusual switch? I mean, there are others who've done it. People have gone into cricket commentary, people have started, I mean, turned to writing novels and so on. But what made you, the two of you, do the switch?
I started my journey actually 8 years back with translations,
Yeah.
Professor Sabri, and this was when I realized that there's a huge amount of literature in Marathi, which is not there in English for the larger readership to read, And to my surprise, I found that if I were to look at the top 10 books in Marathi, almost 9 of them had not been translated. So
Okay.
I thought that was a great opportunity for me. And that's where my journey started in 2014 with Raja Ravi Verma, which was written by Ranjit Desai,
Right.
a very acknowledged book. And so far, I've done 12 translations from Marathi to English. And Neelesh and I did our first book together, which was In the Footsteps of Ram.
And Neelesh, yourself?
It is part of my habit of saying yes to everything. Anything new that comes up, I always say, karke dekh lete hain type. So
Okay.
Vikrant and I were sitting, we've been friends for good, 35 years, 35 plus years now. And we often travel together, even though he stays in Baroda now and I stay in Delhi, but we meet at a common point and go traveling together. So in one of these travels, we were in Jaipur when he broached the topic about this and he said, do you know कि चित्रकूट कहाँ है? Now, since I've known this friend of mine to speak in riddles most of the time, तो आप पूछ रहा होगा ऐसे यार. So I told him कि हाँ यहाँ कहीं है. I showed him an area. Said यहाँ कहीं है. So he said कि this is 500 square kilometers. Do you know Chitrakoot is a very important part of the Ramayana? I said हाँ पता तो है लेकिन क्या हुआ है I don't know. So then both of us decided at the same time कि चलो जाके देख के आते हैं. Let's go to Chitrakoot, check out what is there, and in case something good is there, we'll take it up as a book. So we went and we normally people do Chitrakoot in a day. I think Vikrant, we spent almost 5 days there.
Yeah,
and we went around every nook and cranny of Chitrakoot, every small little place we went, every place we found there was a fascinating story. So I also thought that it was a good idea to put it into a book. We've already done 2 books together. There's a third anthology where we have contributed together. He has written 1 or 2 books on his own. I'm writing 1 or 2 on my own. It's all like getting together into a big exercise.
Very, very interesting. So, now that you've jumped into the origins or the genesis of this book, you refer to so many different versions of the Ramayana in your book, and you say you draw on 4 of them in particular, right? But apart from your own reading of these 4 versions, did you end up doing any other preparatory work? Did you consult authorities on the scripture, on the book?
So what we wanted to do was not to really allow the serendipitous part of the journey to be preempted by extensive preparation. So we wanted that element of surprise, and as we traveled to each of these places, we spent a lot of time trying to discover these pundits and these scholars and research people, which was again serendipitous. It was not planned. It was not something which we had done a preparation in advance to go and find out somebody in Rameshwaram or a Hampi or a Nashik. But in each of these places, we were very pleasantly surprised to find people who had tremendous amount of knowledge, who had done the journey of this Ramayana, walking. Some of them had done by cycle. So we met such people, and that really not only maintained the element of surprise, but also gave us a chance to pick up stories which otherwise we would have missed had we only referred to printed books and text which have already been there in libraries.
And Professor, it's not as if we did not actually decide we'll sit down and read the 6 Ramayans and then go out. Because if that would have happened, we would have never got off our chairs and gone out. So what we would actually do is we would go to a particular place. We followed the geographical expanse from from Ayodhya to Chitrakoot to Prayagraj to Chitrakoot, Nasik, Hampi, Rameshwaram, and Sri Lanka. But every time we would come back from one particular journey, see, these journeys took about 15 to 16 months. And since both of us have other day jobs also, so we worked on it only 8-10 days a month. And then we would come back and write that out. So at the time of the writing, we would refer to that particular segment in all the Ramayans that we've read.
Yes.
That was the kind of, because we did not want anybody in the field taking us for a ride. Because what was also happening is that I for instance, go to some ex-person's village and say कि रामचंद्र जी के बारे में यहाँ का कोई कहानी है, so that person would automatically say, हाँ यहाँ तो रुके थे. That person would give a story, not because he wants to lie or he wants to concoct it, but just because his faith in that story is so much that he has heard it over the years. Now we need to cross-check that against whether it has been documented somewhere. I cannot just have stories running through it which are made up by random people all over the country whom I and Vikrant happen to have encountered. So we would come back and study these Ramayans. We may have used only 4, but we have actually studied the Devi Puran also. We have studied the Vyas Ramayana in the Mahabharata. Then we have read numerous commentaries on the Ramayana. So the research has been not only the original text, but commentaries by scholars on the Ramayana itself, so that certain aspects become clearer.
That sounds very challenging, right? I mean, there are these multiple versions. Each of them is voluminous, right? So if you wanted to cross-check a particular aspect in any or all of these, you would need reasonable familiarity with the structure and the flow of these books, right?
That's right, Professor.
Yes,
so
you get to it. After a while, you learn.
The Valmiki Ramayana and Ramcharitmanas by Tulsidas was something we definitely had kind of browsed through and read before we started our journey. So we knew where we would find these references. So we had a broad idea as to where to look for. If a particular event was mentioned by somebody in Rameshwaram or somebody in Nashik, we know which part of the Ramayana to actually refer to. So to that extent,
basic familiarity we had. Right, basic familiarity we had. But we also referred to Eknath and Kamban.
Yes.
These two also we saw, and besides the commentaries and summaries that we have read elsewhere.
So somewhere that you took the help of one of your spouses in understanding Kamban. Since you mentioned that, can I ask whose spouse it is? And
Vikrant.
Yes, so I'm married to a Tamilian, Professor. Professor Sabri, I'm married to a Tamilian.
Okay.
And she also is multilingual, so she speaks Kannada and Tamil apart from other languages. And that helped us, especially in Kishkinda, which is Hampi, and in Rameshwaram, and to some extent in Sri Lanka as well, because in Sri Lanka also a lot of people speak Tamil.
Right.
So that my understanding is only to the extent of managing my way through Tamil Nadu. I can't really understand Tamil to that extent.
But to understand Kamban, the level of efficiency you need in Tamil is fairly.
No, we did not. I must confess to the fact that it was a translation which we referred to.
We read the English translation.
Yes. We read the English version. In the case of Ramcharitmanas and Valmiki Ramayana, we read the originals with the commentaries. But in the case of Kamban, Eknath, of course, both of us read Marathi, so we read the original Marathi. And Kamban, we read a translation.
Yeah, the Tamil there is fairly ancient, and so even
that would have been
something we could not have managed. We couldn't have managed.
When I was reading this book, I was reminded of another book which I had read quite some time ago. That's Dalrymple's book From the Holy Mountain. Both in terms of motivation as well as in terms of the approach and the flow, it sounded very similar. Was this motivated by anything like that? Any pre-existing work, or was it completely original and spontaneous?
Yes, the journey, if you please, I think there was in the footsteps of Nanak is what we had both read. There is a book about Nanak which has been written by a Pakistani author. We had both read that, and I think somewhere along the line the structure came from there, in the sense that we got this thing, we have to travel the path and find out, meet people, talk to them. So the structure actually suggested itself from that. But if it is actually similar sounding to...
We found that nobody has attempted this sort of a travelogue come storytelling in the form in which we did. So in that sense, we were sort of attempting it for the first time in India. And it was not a conscious decision. It sort of evolved itself as we went, writing about our travel and interspersing it with beautiful stories from Ramayana. So the combination eventually came out very well.
This is a book that's been written by two different people. I mean, you obviously collaborate a lot. I'm sure you understand each other very well. But in terms of writing is sort of a voice, isn't it? I mean, when I write, it's my voice, right? And so the two different voices speaking. And what has read about people writing novels collaboratively and so on last 4 or 5 years. The newspapers have been talking about that. Some of the popular novelists collaborating to come up with a novel. And I've always wondered, how is that ever going to be possible, especially in creative writing? And when I read your book, I don't see two different voices speaking. Styles are remarkably, they converge remarkably. How did you achieve that? Or is it that you write exactly the same way, which is
No, we
unlikely?
don't.
Not
We
at
write
all.
differently as well. No, we write totally differently. Our styles are totally different. But I think we'll just give you the mechanics of it and leave you to draw your own conclusions. That each of us wrote a piece, sent it to the other one revised it and sent it back. And ultimately, we got one whole text together. And then one of us worked on it and just stabilized the language. That's it, probably. I don't want to let you into any more secrets than this.
Okay.
Maybe
Right.
this is one way of doing it. Maybe something else we did, but we are not telling you.
Should I presume there are other secrets that you don't want to let me into, or should I take it that there are no more secrets?
Quite a few secrets. We are not going to tell you half of them.
Okay.
Not on a
Okay.
public forum. When we sit across with a cup of coffee in
Okay.
Bangalore, yes, certainly.
Prant, do you
But
want
I
to
think
add?
it's not so difficult. Actually, it's not as difficult as it sounds. I mean, if two
Hmm.
people are tuned to the same kind of thinking and we have traveled together and experienced the whole thing together, then I think it doesn't become a problem. Kyo, Vikrant? What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The
And
styles may
we've known each
differ.
other for so long, it's manageable.
Okay. Okay. So, and how long did the book itself take for you to write? The travel you said was about 18 months.
So we were writing as we traveled. So in that sense, almost 80% of our work was completed by the time we did our 18 months of journey. And the balance, a couple of months, we needed to fine tune the manuscript,
Yeah,
ensure that there are no repetitions or the tone and tenor of the book is consistent from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka and some of those things and a little bit of fact checking. And then we handed it over to the editor in HarperCollins who would then do her work
yeah.
and refine the manuscript and proofreading further before it gets published. So from us, it took around a little less than 2 years.
Let's say, yeah, 22 months, 23 months, yeah.
Including travel time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. That's so. I mean, yeah. I can imagine it should take that sort of time to write something else. I mean, it's not easy writing. That much I can see. Um, if I may switch gear and move on to some other contemporary sort of questions. So one of the things that comes out very clearly from this book is that the Ramayana is not one homogeneous narrative, right? And the heterogeneity in the narrative reflects the heterogeneity of the local cultures in which this story has been handed down from generation to generation, right? But the core of this person called Rama, that you refer to in the book, that is remarkably similar, no matter which part of the country, which narrative you listen to the story from, right? The thing that struck me is, does this whole experience tell you something about the diversity that we see in India today? On the one hand, we see there are identities trying to assert themselves and trying to create multiple Indias within one country. And on the other hand, what the Ramayana tells you is, well, these diversities might exist, but at the core, it's one single culture, one single society. Do you have anything to say about that aspect from what you gather from this book, and as you reflected on it?
May I take that, Vikrant?
Yes, please.
See, you've answered the question yourself, Professor, that ultimately there may be peripheral variations, but the core stays constant. And that's what we've experienced through the journey that we have undertaken. And not only that, I would like to add to it by saying that the element of faith remains constant, regardless of where you are starting from. And that faith is very uniting. It is not a dividing faith. So we found that across the spectrum, wherever you are traveling, the people who are really devoted to Ram or who really have Ram in their heart have an amazing amount of humility, have an amazing amount of love, an amazing amount of compassion. And that, I think, is something that is there in the hearts of all men of God, and not those who posture as men of God. So there is a difference between the two. But ultimately, let me tell you that the core is constant. The core consists of love and compassion, and it is going to go on. We'll give you a story on this, which is not just a story of which is there in the book. Love and compassion is there in Men of God for everybody, not for just your religion. It's for all humanity.
Right, right.
But adding to Neelesh's point, Professor Sabri, I also find that while the core faith remains the same, the way of worship might change. For example, it is only in Ayodhya that we find a young Ram Lalla, because he was born there. He's the son-in-law of that place. He's he's the son of that place. He's mentioned in Ayodhya and respected in a different way compared to a Virai Ram in Nashik or Kishkinda, because that is where Lord Rama has lost his wife. And a
Right.
Kodandaraman in south, where he has now picked up the bow and is
Right.
willing to fight Ravana to ensure that he gets his Sita Ma back. So some of the forms of worship do change, and because of which you find some stories which are attached to these geographical places differing, but as Neelesh mentioned, the core faith remains the same.
So this talking of faith, we all grew up being told to worship Lord Rama as children in the traditional homes, and then you read Indian history, which I did, and as you read Romila Thapar, Rama is presented as a mythological person, modeled perhaps after somebody similar who ruled around that time. All right. So, and then you encounter this conflict, right? And in that conflict, of course, I've managed to over time resolve that internal conflict. Is Lord Rama divine? And did people around that story and did they really exist? Or is he just a mythological character? There's a dichotomy. Did you ever encounter that dichotomy? If you how did you resolve it? You get my point?
Yes,
Absolutely.
we do.
I think that for us to begin with, the dichotomy didn't exist, and it's sort of the faith became more and more reaffirmed when you meet people across the continent from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka, and you find the consistent faith which is coming across in different forms of worship, but nevertheless the same faith. And the fact that, while not going into the argument about some of the scholars who are talking about from the astrological figures to derive a date on which Ramayana actually took place, notwithstanding that, I think we were very clear, and it became sort of reaffirmed after about 18 months of travel, that this story did happen. Like in Kamban Ramayana, there could be exaggeration in terms of crores and crores of vanaras
Yeah,
and some of the things
yeah.
which are hyperbole, and they are expected because when a devotee like Kamban or Tulsidas is writing a story or telling a story about Lord Rama, there is likely to be a little bit of exaggeration and making him a superhuman. But to us, I think it was very clear, especially after the travel, that this story has taken place. There could be some elements of mythology or storytelling which get added to the main narrative, but we do not agree with Romila Thapar that this was something which was created to sort of uh, make an ideal for someone to worship. We do feel that that's not correct.
Yeah, that's one thing. Another thing is, how do you know? Whenever people ask me this question, very often in literature festivals and all, and I'm sure they ask Vikrant too. "Aapko kaise pata sach hai?" So in counter, I ask them, "Do you know where the Buddha was born?" So everybody says Lumbini. Then how do you know? They say there is a stone plaque there. Who put it up? Did Buddha put it up? No, Ashoka put it up. How many years after Buddha was born? You know, 300, 400, 500 years after Buddha was born.
We don't know where the third battle of Panipat happened, would I'm sure revoke a lot of strong reactions from historians. And I was talking to a friend of mine who swears by the summer solstice, the book, The Summer Solstice. I'm sure you've read that book. And he says, if you are in doubt, Sabri, read The Summer Solstice, and you would know that that's not entirely true. We know exactly where and when the Battle of Panipat. So the larger implication of what you're saying to me is that much of what we hear from historians is something that we might want to challenge in spite of all the historiography that they have at their disposal.
Not my statement at all. The exact opposite. That because we are accepting so much of history as history on the basis of archaeological evidence that you have got, on the basis of tablets, on the basis of temple carvings, on the basis of coins, on the basis of writings. There is no reason why we should dispute this too. This is also the truth, because otherwise one particular narrative consistently held across the country over 4,000 years was not possible unless there was a kernel of truth in it. That is why it has survived in the form that it has. So it has to have been true. There is no other way.
So to what extent do you see Ramayana having entered popular imagination in Sri Lanka? I mean, 15% of Sri Lanka are Tamilians. So they have some Indian connection. One can imagine they're being fascinated by the Ramayanam and probably being believers too. But interestingly, you say that Buddhism has also co-opted Lord Rama in many different places. So can you talk a little bit about how popular Ramayana is in Sri Lanka?
Oh, absolutely very popular with the Indians, and also the Buddhists who were originally Indians who over the last few centuries have become Buddhists. The kind of worship we do for Lord Shiva or Lord Rama in India, the same continues in Sri Lanka. And despite Hindus being only 15 or 20%, you can see that predominant, especially in southern Sri Lanka, it's Trincomalee, those areas, it's extremely popular. Yeah, Neelesh.
Yeah. No, nothing to add to this. No.
But what one hears talks to Sri Lankans, it looks like they worship Ravana as much as many others in Sri Lanka worship Rama.
That is what we presumed when we went there, and we were surprised to find that that's not the case at all. There is no worship of Ravan as a hero or as a god or anything of that kind. Very clearly, they worship Lord Ram, and Ravana is the king of Sri Lanka who was defeated because he had so many ills, and they do worship or revere Vibhishan, who took over from Ravan and was coronated as the king. So there's a temple in his name as well.
That's probably
there is a lot of respect. If I may add, there is a lot of respect for Ravan, in the sense that he was a very good administrator, he was a very good musician, he was a learned Pandit, but he had vanity and he made a couple of mistakes due to which he had to go. So they don't hate Ram. They don't say that Ravan was absolutely right. They said yes, he made a mistake. Because of that, he had to go. And the only Ravan temples in Sri Lanka are to the north, where the Tamil population was initially there. So most of the temples are, one or two temples to Ravan are there, and they are not the ancient temples. The ancient temples are all to Shiva. Trincomalee, we saw the Shiva temple, Ravan himself had put up. For that matter, I kept telling people that I live in Delhi, and Ravan is worshipped more in Delhi than he is worshipped anywhere else, because a place called Noida, in Noida, right next to Delhi, on the border of Delhi, Sector 56, there is a Ravan temple. Because that village, Bisrak, is supposed to be the birthplace of Ravan. Right. So Ravan is actually worshipped more in India than he is worshipped. There are 3-4 temples to Ravan in India, whereas not as many in Sri Lanka.
Is that acknowledged in any of the Ramayana versions? Because I was hearing it for the first time.
No, it's...
What? Bisrak? Bisrak has a place.
Bisrak?
No,
it's
no,
not mentioned. It's not mentioned. These are more of folklore, which people over the many centuries tend to believe.
Because I remember reading that in your book too. He was born in Noida, but he ruled in Sri Lanka, something to that.
But he was born in, no, that is there in the Uttarakhand. He was born in India. He was born of a rishi in North India.
Okay.
So he ruled Lanka because he took over Lanka from his brother Kuber. And Kuber had set up Lanka as Alkapuri, initially set up. And Ravan actually took it from him and chased him up to the Himalayas because of sibling rivalry.
Is there any incident?
He was born in North India, that is established.
Okay. I was hearing it for the first time, but I'm sure there is some basis to where you found it. Is there remarkable that happened in the process of writing the book that you would like to share with the viewers of this?
I will tell you the story of the IIM, which will interest the IIM Bangalore crowd a lot, which is that we were in Hampi. And Hampi, one of the places, it's of course, Hampi is Kishkinda. And that is where the Hanuman janmasthali is located. We went to the Hanuman janmasthali, it's about 550 steps vertically upwards. At the top of it is the temple where Anjani Mata prayed. There's an Anjani Mata temple, and there is also a Hanuman temple over there, which was actually carved out by the Guruji who set up the temple by hand. He was blind, but he used to feel the stone like this every day. till finally, ultimately, because of the number of times he actually felt it, the stone began to crack and that particular idol emerged from it. Now, we went looking for the Panditji over there. And we were told, the first day we went up, we were told, Panditji niche gaye hai. We went down to his room. It was a 2-room house he stayed in. We were told, wo to shahar chale gaye hai. So we made a point to go back. Next day we went back. Again, we could not find him. Third day we went back. Finally, I knocked on the door. The light was on. And a young guy, about 30s, opened the door. And I said, "Mujhe Panditji se milna hai." He said, "That's me." After you don't look like a Panditji at all. You look like a corporate guy. He's in his 30s. So his name is Fanindranath. And he says, "Yes, I'm from IIM Bangalore."
Okay.
And he additionally he had a startup in Bangalore, which he says that I came here one day and I went up to the temple and I felt this was my calling, serving the Lord. So I shut that down. I sold everything and with my mother and came and I live in a 2-room apartment over here. So I asked him, the lifestyle must have changed a lot. He says, yes, there my garage was larger than my house is here. But he says, when I was there, I would come home every evening and stressed. I would have a drink and fight with my mother. Here I come, I touch her feet and we cook together. He says, who is happier, that me or this me?
Right.
And then when I asked him, I told him, we have been corporate guys and we know that the corporate world is so insecure. Don't you ever feel that if you are turned away from this temple, what will you do? You cut your umbilical cord with the corporate world. And suppose the temple, the management decides to dispense with your services. What happens to you? Now that answer is a great eye opener. He says, the Lord got me here. The Lord will take care of me. Why should I worry?
I wish you had mentioned his IIMB connection in the book. I remember reading.
I think it is.
Yeah, it is there.
I think it is mentioned. I think it is mentioned.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Yes. Look at the smile. Both the IIM guys are smiling like anything when hearing this.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are all very parochial.
Yes. Absolutely.
When it comes to the institute. Yeah. So have you planned anything similar for the Mahabharatam, if that's not secret yet? Oh, you don't want to talk about it. I can see that.
No, yes.
Comment on this one.
Yeah, I will say yes and no. There are parts. I'll answer it in a different form. The Ramayana allows you to have a linear geographical travel from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka because it was a very but there are parts of Mahabharata which are probably which allow themselves to have such a linear travel. There are parts of Krishna's travel which one could probably explore. But coming back to what me and Neelesh like to call the mytho travelogue, there are other areas in India which open itself to, and Neelesh is pointing saying lips are sealed, but I just want to give a hint that there are such journeys in India which open itself to such a beautiful journey and the storytelling around that, which we definitely have plans to explore over the next couple of years. So we would continue on this mytho travelogue, which as for a lack of a better word, a formula we have found, which seems to sort of appeal to readers and I don't know if I mentioned, Professor Sabari, this is being made into an OTT serial. The book has been made. The rights, it has already been made. And it should come on one of the OTT platforms. I'm not sure when because the producer didn't share those details with us, but they bought the rights from HarperCollins, and around Diwali, we expect in the footsteps of Ram to come as in form of a travel and a storytelling serial. So we're really looking forward to that.
6-part web series. 6-part web series. It will be and it's also being translated into Hindi. It is being translated into Gujarati and Marathi. Hindi, incidentally, Vikrant's wife Subha is doing it for us.
Okay. Towards the end of the book, before I wrap up, towards the end of the book, you make a very powerful statement, which is the statement that Mahan Premdas, I think, mentioned to you. No matter what happens, it'll change you as a person, right? To me, that was the most moving part of the book. So, to the extent that it's not very private, can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, how did it change you? In what ways did it change you?
I think to me, many of us as engineers and management graduates, there's a sense of inquiry and a questioning, approach which you take to anything. it was surprising that while that has not changed, the faith has not diminished that approach. The cynicism or which probably came along with this questioning approach has surely changed to more of belief than starting with a negative. But it still does not prevent me from questioning and asking and searching for the truth. But the starting point is not about disbelief, but about actually wanting to find the truth. So that to me has been a great change. Nilesh?
I think it's a similar thing, the changes in the level of the faith.
One overwhelming emotion, if I were to say, was about humility. Because the kind of people we met, the kind of scholars we met, the people in Chitrakoot who are doing 24/7 by 365 recitation of Ramcharitmanas, it
Right?
tells us that the amount of faith and the kind of involvement, deep involvement people have in the Ramayana is just so unbelievable that it leaves us totally humbled. We felt very, I would not use the word small, but we felt that what we're doing is just a very, very small part of wanting to get Ramayana to the masses. There are people who have been doing that without looking at any publicity for
Yes,
generations together.
yes, yes.
Well, Vikrant and Neelesh, this has been an amazing journey for the two of you. I clearly don't see myself doing it, especially some of the parts that you've been through, those difficult terrains that you went through in Sri Lanka, where if you had lost your this thing just a little bit, you would have been probably in what people think might be Patal or you think might be Patal. I don't see myself ever doing this journey, but I think I got to do what's next best or closest to it, which is talk to you guys. So the pleasure
Thank
of
you.
your journey
Thank
to some extent, I've
you.
managed to do. It's a lot, and I mean, as you mentioned in the beginning, the fact that Vikrant is an IIMB alum. I mean, at the risk of sounding very parochial, Neelesh, and apologies to you for that. It makes the interview even more special. It's always nice to talk to an alum.
If you could make it a little more inclusive and say management graduates, I could also be classified in it. It will be simpler. I may be from a different institute, but yet I did my Kotler and all Drucker very seriously.